Tim Hague Reads Books, presented by Tim Hague. Christopher Fowler is best known for his fiction. We talked to him last year about his latest Bryant and May mystery. But before he became a full-time writer, he had a day job, nay a career, first in advertising and then in film publicity. And while you may not realize it, you have certainly come across his work. Film Freak is an acute and self-deprecating memoir of his glittering successes and, yes, some of his hilarious failures.
This is Tim Hague Reads Books with Film Freak, and it says on the front, starring Christopher Fowler, which I think means that you wrote it. And so this is no, it's not an autobiography. No, it's a memoir. No, it's not a memoir. It's a cultural history. Not a cultural history so much as a love letter to movies, or even a sort of a love story, a sort of bromance love story. What is it, Chris? It's all of these things.
It is. I kind of over the years I make endless notes about films because you're passionate about films. You want to tell people about them, and then that kind of evolved into pieces that ended up involving members of my family, friends, various people walking through, and they got included as well. And so it became this sort of, I don't think you can do a film history without bringing in the circumstances when films were seen. I think, the trouble with an awful lot of books about films is they kind of lift films out of the time when they were made and the audiences who saw them. And in a way, I kind of wanted to put those elements back in.
And of course, you did work in the film industry on a slightly peripheral level. You were in film publicity. In fact, my listener is going to know your work. You can guess exactly where I'm going with this one, can't you?
Yeah, I can.
It's the one everybody wants to do, and the Daily Telegraph pulled it out. But you wrote that line for the film Alien. In space, no one can hear you scream.
Yeah. Well, what used to happen is you used to get invited along to screenings of films you knew nothing about at all. And it was like sort of wet Tuesday morning when go along and see Alien, and sort of rough cut, and scared the bejabbers out of everybody. And then they commission you to do copy lines for the poster. And I think in those days you used to get something like 20 quid a page. So I think it was probably one of about 200 that we hammered out.
But it's the one. And you're very modest about it. You sort of, you say in the book, other people must have thought of this. But if they had, they'd have used it. So
I say that because whenever anything that we created over the years, of 30 years in the film industry, of making everything from movie trailers to those hour-long documentaries on Bond that always used to go out on Boxing Day. We did everything except, we always used to say we do.
They still do those, but you don't make them.
Yeah, they still do them. And we always used to say we do everything except make the film. So you do the photo shoots and actually often write jokes for visiting actors who were going to be on like chat shows, who weren't naturally funny people.
And there are some of those.
A lot of those around. So you'd often end up writing, often giving them a pile of jokes to do. I did a whole load of jokes for Leslie Nielsen when he was doing the Naked Gun films, because he was profoundly deaf and he had these two huge hearing aids. But he was quite happy to, read and memorize stuff. So he had these quips that he'd drop in.
Now, before that, of course, you were in the advertising business. Yeah. You started out in advertising and did all sorts, and you're very funny about it in the book with some of the campaigns you did. You Brentford nylons,
Brentford
very rude
nylons, remember? Horrible, genuinely awful ads. I think we did 2 a week with Alan Fluff Freeman.
You describe Brentford nylons as making sheets that you cling to you with static electricity, and you say that they cling to you like an ugly
grateful sex partner.
Which sort of does conjure a picture.
Yeah,
actually, you're pretty good with a simile. There's a film, a terrible film that you saw where you say the audience laughed with the desperation of cancer-stricken children at their last panto.
Well, because often you have these premieres where you were surrounded by the staff from the distribution company, all studying the audience desperately, wanting them to have a good time. And when you're sitting there overlooked by a whole bunch of people going, "Go on, laugh," it's the most unfunny thing in the world, and it kills the room. And yeah, I think I mentioned in the book we went to the premiere of Hair, which was actually Milos Forman, great movie, still stands stands up as being a very underrated film. But the distributors didn't know what to do with it, and so they thought music. We'll get Morris dancers in the theatre, this, and then they didn't do that, and then they I think we used the Morris dancers for "Can't Stop the Music," which was the
But these
disco
people were always
movie.
terribly literal, weren't they? Hair, so everybody had to have wigs. And
Yeah.
you say
The usherettes were dressed up.
Dish,
Yeah,
you saw the premiere of Soap Dish, and the free giveaway was,
a soap dish.
of course, it was.
Somebody got paid for coming up with that. I think I've still got a bronze Planet of the Apes pencil holder where you basically just stick pencils in a gorilla's head. I can't believe that somebody gets paid good money for coming up with these things.
Well, while you were working in advertising, you met the man who was going to become your business partner and best friend. I said it was kind of a bromance. You were as close as two blokes can be.
Yeah.
Tell me about Jim Sturgeon.
He was working in an advertising agency. He was profoundly dyslexic, and he was a storyboard artist who then became a producer. And he had all the business savvy that I didn't have. But he was also very creative. But we both loved movies, both wanted to get out of advertising, both hated advertising. I think I was working on Golden Wonder crisps at that point, and he was doing country and western music, and we just were just ready to kill ourselves. And we thought, what can we do? And there was this area which was film marketing, which nobody had ever thought about seriously. The posters were done by a handful of old boys in Soho.
And they was drawn or painted back for some reason. Why was that?
They were drawn. Well, some of them were drawn in the old-fashioned Pentel pens because Rank Films wouldn't pay for paint, and it was cheaper to make them use Pentels. So, I mean, these were really done, knocked out for pence. And of course, the artists never got the rights to their own work. The artwork went off to Rank and then was promptly sort of lost. So they printed the posters, and the posters were loaded into the same vans that carried the film cans to cinemas around the country. And that was film promotion in the UK. It was a bunch of vans and some old boys in an attic.
So you and Jim decided that there was a market, there was a niche there.
Take a more serious approach to it and carefully target it. So if you've got a particular type of film, you could aim it at a particular audience and recommend, doing radio and TV commercials to promote it, and develop specific campaigns in the press or posters that would target people. There was a whole chain of films in the 70s. Awful, crappy Italian weepies. They were called things like The Last Snows of Spring.
Tell me that one. Yes, but you say it's boy meets girl, girl takes 2 hours to die.
Basically, yeah.
And
I thought, oh God, it's going to be like advertising all over again. Except I realised there was a market for every film. And yeah, I met a woman who told me she'd seen it 92 times, and it was her favourite all-time film. And I thought, that's interesting, and we looked at that, her market.
But your promotional thing was a box of Kleenex.
Boxes of tissues.
Take somebody to wipe away a tear.
Yes, indeed, yeah. And it worked brilliantly. On the back of that, they ended up distributing another half dozen of these damn things. So we hoist with their own petard. But lots of, horror, exploitation movies, and peculiar films that wouldn't get released now, like, Where's Popper and Harold and Maude, and this kind of odd. These would go straight to video now.
You did end up with a fantastic background in, well, particularly British movies. Yeah, you saw all the foreign ones as well. But you have an encyclopedic knowledge of old British films. I mean, I thought I was all right, but completely out of my depth.
No, I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge. Kim Newman has an encyclopedic knowledge because he always corrects me. He read the book and said, "There's a mistake on page something like that." He was right. It's a really small one. He spotted it immediately. I suppose
you just spend all your life in the
yeah.
movies,
you go to work in the morning. The first thing you do at 9 o'clock in the morning, see a movie. Lunchtime, see a movie. Evening, see a movie.
Oh, but even before that, you would go into the movies as often as you could, even from home. You were born in Greenwich, weren't you?
Yeah.
And then when you're working in advertising, it was your first choice of recreation.
Yeah, totally. I was a kid in a candy store when the job came up because, it was like doing the thing you most wanted to do in the world and get paid for it.
Because there were all those rep cinemas back then. We didn't have them where I came. You might not have liked Greenwich in the 70s, but you should have been in Bradford, mate. It was a cultural desert. And I got my limited education in old movies from the TV, which again you don't get anymore because it's all ghettoized. You can go to TCM and watch the old movies there, but if you watch the mainstream channels, they don't show those old films anymore.
No, not at all.
I used to work in an office with a bunch of younger people about 10 years ago, and I realised they'd never heard of films that I thought everybody had seen. I did a quick top 10 of the first unmissable films that I thought that I came, off my top of my head, like The Third Man and Philadelphia Story, things like that. They hadn't heard of any of them.
Black and white, isn't it? But
black and white.
People actually don't want to watch black and white films. I mean, supposedly, this is some market researcher somewhere has trotted out this fact, the days of seeing them, on TV are gone. But I think an awful lot of those, they were the only way to see them, and in the rep cinemas, because there were a lot of repertory cinemas in London, and weird ones. They weren't kind of like nice places like the NFT. They were kind of rat holes with double bills that changed every day, and they kind of attracted two types of people, or three types of people. People kind of who had nowhere else to go, basically, which was like sheltering from the rain. People who had a curious obsession with, say, that particular movie, like they collect all the movies of Fred McMurray or someone, and let's say lonely bachelor gentleman.
And you and Jim.
and me and Jim. And what we used to have to do is weigh up how badly we wanted to see a movie. Because there was a notorious cinema in Victoria where there was an awful lot of seat changing going on all the time. It was very, very, it was all felt vaguely peculiar. And I thought, we're never going to get a chance to see this particular double bill ever again. So then you have to weigh it against how badly do I want to see it, and can I stand going to this terrible cinema?
So, one of the things I wanted to find out from you is, was there a golden age of British movies? Because you can blow hot and cold. You can get enthusiastic, elegiac about pretty well any period, but you can be extremely rude about most of the periods of British films as well. And was there a golden age, or was it always?
No, this is the thing. I follow Matthew Sweet's remark about not becoming a Bakelite sniffing nostalgist. Because I really hate nostalgia, but there were lots of wonderful films. There were lots of dreadful films simultaneously. I don't think you can define a golden age, but if you were going to try and nail it down, there would be two distinct periods: British post-war film, which be around the Ealings, and a lot of other films that were out at the same time, because so many people went to the cinema. It was basically the only affordable entertainment. And from about 62 to 68, which was really this immense flowering of British cinema when we were making big movies like Lawrence of Arabia. And of course the Beatles films, things like that. So suddenly swinging London, and it burst forward, and it kind of quickly toppled over into decadence and surrealism. So you had Ken Russell starting to make terrible films.
Listomania. You cite as one of the... And God, that was a terrible film. Truly bad.
Unwatchable film.
Well, any film with Roger Daltrey trying to act in it is going to be a bit of a non-starter.
And a kind of peculiar electronic Rick Wakeman-esque score done to Franz Liszt. It's just... I think he was trying to capitalise on the fact that in Tommy he'd basically created the first music video. And the second one didn't really work. And there were lots of other films that just showed you that it had lost the plot. By 1970, it had lost the plot and it had gone.
Well, so much had gone. Those rep cinemas had gone. And the film industry that you knew in Soho was going as well. Yeah. And that's quite sad. I mean, it's quite a sad note in the book. Is the dying of that little world of movies.
It was unique. You'd walk down the street, and on both sides of the road, you'd just see film posters from one end to the other, and they're all in the one side had these little curvy windows which were filled with film memorabilia and prop shops and technical shops. It was the nearest we would ever have got to Hollywood. And
that's not true, is it? Because there's a couple of chapters in here where you go to LA and you work in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I was not completely sure about this. Your film company must have been successful. We sit in this Xanadu of a mansion in King's Cross here. I mean, there's Susan Alexander completing a jigsaw in the fireplace over there. I mean, so it can't have been, because you're very funny and very self-deprecating. There are the visits to Cannes, which you make big comic fun of, and then there's opening a nightclub, which then shuts. There's your time in LA trying to do the same thing in America, and you're self-deprecating about it, but it must have all worked out because you had a career out of it.
Yeah, I actually, in that list, I mercifully didn't include, for your sake, my abortive Christmas single, and which I have somewhere in the cupboard, and various other things. I mean, but the great thing I think about those times was there was opportunity to try lots of different things. So when we had the film company, it made sense that as we were working on so many American films, let's go to Hollywood, let's set up an office in Hollywood. And so I went to Beverly Hills with a suitcase and stayed in a hotel that turned out to be a brothel. And we basically got our first client by knocking on doors, making phone calls and knocking on doors. And then we stayed. Well, I think the company's still there, and so I went in 1980, and it's still going, but in a different form.
The temptation to steal all your one-liners is almost overwhelming, but you nearly sold a script that you didn't have to a producer who thought you were a writer.
Oh, you mean about the Four Horsemen?
I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, because basically at that point, I was writing books, and one of them had been sold to Paramount, and I looked in on Paramount to this executive, and when you go to have your meetings at Paramount, you sit. It's basically like a sort of dentist's waiting room. You sit in a corridor with a load of other people all waiting to pitch, and they see you on the half hour, and you get exactly half hour. So I was booked in to see this guy, and he came out and he said, "Hey, Chris, your project, we screwed up. What else have you got?" And I suddenly realised I wasn't there to talk about the film of my book. I was there to pitch. So I came up with this terrible idea of a film executive who finds out that he's one of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And then my agent phoned me and said, he loves it. He loves it. You have to write it up as a treatment. But until you deliver, we have to keep him away from a Bible because he thinks you made them up. Yeah, you get a lot of stuff like that in Hollywood. I mean, the problem is that if they had all been better read, they would have had tons and tons of projects to work from. But nobody in Hollywood had ever picked up a book. So I think there was one bookstore. And when I was there, I'm sure it's better now, but if they'd have read more, they'd have found the copyright-free rights to some great films to make.
Whereas all the Louis B. Mayers and that crowd were illiterate European Jews who had such respect for the written word that they did go and get proper writers to come. And they did sort of buy up the rights to books.
They got emigre Europeans, and they bought up rights to sometimes quite obscure books.
Now, you were keen on the escapist films of your youth, but less happy with them now. They're all flying teenagers in tights and all CGI. You just don't like that anything like as much. I think I take your point.
It's kind of a mix. I mean, there are a lot of great ones that I've loved, in the recent, like the Batman reboots and the Star Trek reboots and things like that, and some great animated stuff. But it's this thing about demographically deciding that everything has to be remade with teenagers. There was this idea that they remade Rear Window with a teenager, and there was an idea that they were going to remake every Hitchcock film, but with teenagers. I can see it in the pitch, can't you? When it's like, I know what we're going to do. We're going to remake every old movie, but with teens. And that's kind of a bit sad. I mean, it's the fact that everything has to be demographically squared off into one particular.
And also,
group.
it's in a way it's too easy, isn't it, to have spectacle? If you saw Avatar, you had to see it on a big screen because you see it as a movie, and there's not very much there. It's a terrible film.
Yeah. I mean, but again, you see, they recognised that they were making less money in America, and they had to open up China and India. So Hollywood sold in a massive amount of 3D projection equipment. So, which is why you get Kung Fu Panda. It's set in China because it's going for the Chinese market. It's very simple.
Well, Chris, Film Freak is Absolutely marvelous. It's a romp. It's very funny and it's terribly touching. I felt I knew Jim Sturgeon, your partner, by the end as a personal friend, and that comes across beautifully. So it's got all the value of the novels, and it's all true.
Yeah, I'm afraid it is. Yeah, it's all the ugly truth.
Chris Fowler, thank you very much.
A pleasure.
Film Freak is published by Doubleday at £16.99. That was Tim Hague Reads Books, presented by Tim Hague. Tim Hague Reads Books is a Green Shoot production. More details can be found at www.green-shoot.com, or Tim can be contacted on tim@green-shoot.com.